Hi, my name is Nick Bradley, and I'm a business growth expert. I work with entrepreneurs and investors to create empires by buying, scaling, and selling businesses. Catch me on this week's episode of The Jesse T Show. I've spent my career effectively in mergers and acquisitions. So I worked for a number of years in the world of corporate for some big multinationals like News International under Rupert Murdoch. And then I worked for some other big publishing groups in the UK. I moved from Australia to the UK in 2003. Been based here for 17 years, but I did do a stint in New York working for a cool company called Getty Images for a period of time. And that got me into the world of what is private equity, high-level investments, turnarounds, scale-ups, and exits. And I've been involved I've got over 100 acquisitions in my career and 24 business sales, for a combined value of just over $5.2 billion. So, but that's the fun part of the story. I can go back and tell you how I got there.
Which might be bring it, brother. We want to hear it all.
Yeah. So basically, I grew up in this little place called Adelaide, South Australia, which is at the very, very bottom of Australia. And it's famous for three things. It's famous for lots of churches. I don't know why, but if you go around the place, you just see like literally the spires of churches everywhere. It's famous for big sharks, like massive great white sharks. They filmed a lot of the open water scenes from Jaws in the seas around South Australia, and serial killers. Like literally, we've had more serial killers in Adelaide per head of population than I think any other kind of city in the world.
I wonder if one causes the other, like so many churches cause the serial killers, or they need church to go like repent. Like
the only thing I know is I had to leave, right? I had to leave. So I started my first business as like an entrepreneur, if you like, at 19. It was a fitness business in the gym scene. I was a personal trainer, but it was like a private studio. I had staff. I had a number of clients. And it gave me a certain amount of income, certainly as a 19 to 20-year-old. I had plenty of cash. But it wasn't what I call a great business success. I ended up selling that business for $3,000, enough for me to get in my car and drive to Sydney. And that's when I started working for Rupert Murdoch. So I had a pretty illustrious career in that media world, lots of, fun, got up to some pretty high levels in terms of C-suite roles and things like that, board level roles. But I always had this frustration. If you knew me back then, I was a bit of an ass. And I had this massive chip on my shoulder, and it was all about the next title. It was the next pay rise. From the outside in looking, you'd be like, wow, this guy's got everything. He's got the $1 million house. He's got the Porsches. He's got everything, right? But inside, I was getting massively eaten up, like just, full on. And what it came down to was this, and I think it's an interesting, message for people listening, is I was told growing up that entrepreneurship was bad. And that, you had to have the safety of a job, right? So my grandfather, who I respect massively, one of the biggest influences in my life, he said to me, I don't care what you do, I want you to go to university. And once you've done that, I want you to get a job, right? So when I started this gym that ended up not being much of a success, I suppose in the back of my mind, I had this message, this programming, and I think I sabotaged its success. So just when it was about to really do well, is when I decided to chuck it all in. Wow. And then I went on this journey. I tell you that part of it because, as I said, I had lots of perceived success. But what started to happen is I got into this world of private equity, and I was involved in very, very full-on financial decisions. A lot of the decisions were pretty ruthless. I was the guy that would fly around to companies that were acquired by other companies, and I'd do these big turnarounds. And if you've ever seen, there's a movie called Up in the Air with George Clooney. And it's terrible movie actually, but he flies around and he just sacks people with these big white envelopes. And that was what I did. And so anyway, I was starting to really feel not good. I was starting to physically feel not good. And one of the key parts of my story is this. My dad left us when I was 2 years of age. And that you don't really know the scars of some of that until later on. Right. They say, I think Freud said, show me the boy at 7, I'll show you the man. Right. So all through that sort of early part of my life, I was trying to please this person that I'd never met. And then I was trying to live up to expectations. So I was quite confused and I was quite lost. And I remember I put on a whole heap of weight. I weigh something like 75 kilos now, Jesse. I was 130 kilos, wow. Almost not quite double, as a 10-year-old boy. and bullied and all this sort of stuff. And I went through this pretty full on. I had to transform myself to kind of, to do what I ended up doing and become successful in that corporate career. But anyway, my dad came back into my life when I was 34. So he left when I was 2, came back at 34, and I found out that he was an incredibly successful entrepreneur. So he had his first business. He was a millionaire in his late 30s. He lost everything in a terrorist attack in Melbourne.
Wow.
There was a bombing of the Turkish consulate next to this chain of jewelry stores that he had. He was broke and bankrupt in his 40s, and then he reinvented himself and started a whole nother set of businesses in his 50s and became a millionaire again. And so I met him when I was going through all this kind of challenging thought process. And then I realized that a lot of me was sort of from him, and I was this repressed entrepreneur. And so I met him, and then he passed away super quick. He got cancer and died within 12 months. Right. So I give you the long story because that sort of period of time, which was about 18 months in total, when I was going through this kind of certainly mental breakdown, emotional breakdown, then my dad comes back in. I realized that the entrepreneurial spirit and maybe some of the traits were from him. I had this massive meltdown, like literally. And I had to change because I wasn't showing up as the right person for my wife, my kids, all that sort of stuff. As I said, even though it looked like perceived success on the outside. So I called up a mate, and he was a guy who retired in his late 20s. He sold his company for 65 million pounds. And he was always a bit weird when I knew him back at university. He was always the guy who never went out drinking or playing pool. And he was always into personal development. And he said to me, Nick, you've got to go and get yourself away for a few days. You've just got to get out of your environment. You've had your dad die. You've had all this stuff going on. You're stuck in this toxic world of private equity and greed. And he suggested that I go to a Tony Robbins event. So I remember speaking to my wife, and I literally, after having that phone call, I remember literally looking online, and about 3 weeks later, I ended up at this event in Chicago called Unleash the Power Within.
Yep.
And I made the decision at that event to quit everything that I built. Like literally just say, that's it. This is the day when everything's going to change, right? The decision. So I came back, and I didn't quit straight away. I spent the next 12 months constructing what I do now, launched a podcast myself, had some success with that. And I've now got 2 separate 7-figure businesses, plus another 3 that are going to be there in the next 12 months. And I've created all that within about 19 months.